We want to welcome you all to this special time that we're going to be spending together where we are discussing The Deepest Place, Dr. Curt Thompson's very new book, so new that you don't even have it in your hands yet. But we are excited that you have taken the opportunity to pre-order this book. And so just as a little bonus, we wanted to go through a little bit of the book with you here now. We're going to go through chapter 4 here, which is entitled Glory. Again, the book that you've purchased is called The Deepest Place, Suffering and the Formation of Hope. And we are really excited for you to get this book in your hands. We are really excited to talk about this book and to learn from it. And I am so happy that I've gotten an advanced copy of it and had the opportunity to read at least up to the point that we're speaking of today. and so let's jump right in. You know, Curt, I will say that you ask a question very early in the book, which is, how does the notion of the glory of God have anything to do with the healing of trauma and thus the transformation of interpersonal and neurobiological features of that spiritual healing? So can you answer that for us today?
Yeah, you know, I can say this. I don't know about you two. I have the whole notion. Like I got a good sense of what it means to be like uncomfortable, a good sense of what it means to be in pain, a good sense of what it means to suffer. Both, and we all have our own particular ways in which that happens, and we have acquaintances and friends and family members and people around us that we suffer, and then there's people in the distance that we know that suffer that we aren't maybe personally connected to, but. You know, everything from all the fractures in our country to Russia and Ukraine and all the things. And I have to say that for the longest time, like the whole notion of God's glory seems like in a completely other disconnected category for me. I don't easily in my head juxtapose those two things. It's kind of like, the notion that of God's glory that I was kind of, trained and formed to imagine and conceptualize when I was a kid growing up and throughout my adult life as a follower of Jesus. I have this notion that glory is like this thing that is separate from me, and of course, like God is in God's beauty and God's power and God's nature and all the things that are not that hard to identify, but that has always felt like something very other than me. And so, like, I don't really, like, his glory coming into the room, like, what does that have to do with the things that I'm wrapped around the axle about? What does that have to do with my brother's cancer? How is that going to do anything? How is that going to, what's that, the glory walks into the room, and how's that going to, like somehow save my friend's marriage that is, spinning out of control, or all the things that we've talked about here, about people's lived experience that is fraught with suffering, and this for our audience, this passage in Romans kind of like brings it right to a head for me, because Paul talks, he's coming out of this text in Romans chapter 5, the first 5 verses, which is what the book is going to explore. He gets to that place where he says, and we hope for the glory of God. We hope in the glory of God. We hope in that. And not only this, but we glory also in our suffering. And I'm like, great. Like, what the heck? I have no freaking idea what that means. We glory in our suffering. Like, we're supposed to be happy in our sufferings. We're supposed to, like, we give, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Mm-hmm. And then, if you pause and kind of pull the camera back, if we're willing to explore the notion of glory, it turns out that like my understanding and view of it was actually pretty myopic. It was pretty narrow. Because when you get to John's Gospel, the Bible is full of references to God's glory in the way that we've talked about it. But when you get to John's gospel, the writer starts putting words in Jesus' mouth. Like Jesus has said things about glory, and the writer talks about God's glory that is there's a completely different facet of this that I've just not been very much in touch with. And what John's writing emphasizes is that when Jesus talks about, when he prays and asks God to glorify me as I have glorified you, I found the work of the theologian and missionary Leslie Newbigin to be really helpful with this. Newbigin points out that Jesus isn't talking about glory in some sense of, he's providing adulation to God, that he's providing praise to God, that he's just standing back here and telling God how great he is. That what Jesus is talking about, especially in John's gospel, is this notion of that glory, that when God is glorifying Jesus, what he's saying is like God is loving him. The Father is loving the Son, and the Son is loving the Father. This notion that to be glorified is to be loved like right out of our socks. And I read that and I thought, oh my gosh. And then, C.S. Lewis has this just amazing sermon that he writes called The Weight of Glory. And in it, he talks about this very notion that what would it be like for a human to bear the weight of God's unrelenting, his unrelenting, immeasurable delight in our presence. And to encounter that in the moments when we are most aware of the parts of us that we hate the most. And that, Lewis talks about what it's like when, a dog glories in his owner's delight. And he said, there's no greater pleasure for a dog than for the dog to experience its owner's pleasure in him. This is the dogs like they live for that.
Yeah, it's so funny because you've seen my dog occasionally in my little recording studio here with me, and I can leave for 5 minutes, and I come back and it's like, where have you been all my life? She's jumping up and down, she'll hug my leg. She'll literally get up on her hind legs and wrap her other legs around my leg and just hug my leg. And then you'll say, get on the couch, and she'll run and get on the couch, get on the back of the couch, and just wait for you to come over and pet her. And it's like, you are the greatest thing that's ever happened, and why have you been gone for so long?
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I think so. This chapter is really introducing us to and highlighting this way of glory of the Father loving the Son and the Son loving the Father. Mm-hmm. And the Son then loving the disciples. We beheld his glory. And when John says that, John's not just talking about, oh my gosh, we beheld this unbelievably beautiful, amazing, that's included in it. But it is not, it's not the leading edge. It's we beheld being beheld. Mm-hmm. And this is crucially important, as it turns out, when it comes to our turning our attention in the direction of suffering. Because if that's the experience that I have of being loved in that way, and being loved in that way in the presence of our both being aware of the parts of me that are really broken.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you say, Curt, we're not thinking of this daily, hourly. And you say, what would it be like if we were mindful of how much we were loved?
Right. Right. In the chapter, there is a patient, a character named Cheney.
I'm glad you said her name first because I have been struggling with that. Shanae. I thought it was Shanae.
And then
I
was saying Shaney. So
I'm glad you're the first out of the gate with it. So thank you for that.
You got it now?
Well, yeah, okay. Well, I'm glad to know that. I mean, it's possible that she's suffered under that name. I don't know. With people wondering, what am I? Are you?
If she hasn't before, she will now.
Yeah, right. But this, her parents were NGO workers overseas. Like many parents, they send their kids to schools that are away from where they're living, and she ended up, being bullied. She ended up, as a way to cope with that, she, developed a relationship with an older guy who she liked, and he liked her, and then she gets pregnant, and then her parents can't tolerate this, and so they pay for an abortion.
And you say that by the time she comes to your office, that despair leads her there looking for relief.
Right.
And then the story unfolds from there, which is just, let's hear some more about that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the whole notion, I mean, and it's not like, we don't start to talk to Cheney. I don't start to talk to Cheney about, God's glory. We're not doing that. But after some work individually with me, we then, she entered into one of these confessional communities. And it was there that, there was one moment in particular that I describe in the book where she's having a particular, she's in contact with a memory of just something that just feels horrible about herself. Mm-hmm. And then there's this experience of I'm talking to her and she's looking at me and she's not looking at anybody else because it's too hard.
Right.
And then I start, we ask, will you look at other people? And she goes around the room. And this feels Herculean when you're in the moment.
Yeah.
Right? This notion of allowing yourself to take the risk of being receptive to the gaze of others who love you. Because, you don't have the neural real estate that is available to easily receive that. Because it's so caught up in bracing for the impact of, bad news is coming. And over the course of what felt like hours to her, which was just a couple of minutes, she started to have, you could watch on her face the transformation. And it went from this rigid, frightened look, then, and then they were tearful, to then pausing, and then tears continuing, and you could tell they were coming from a different place. They were coming from a place of I can't believe this is happening to me. Oh my gosh, I don't want this to stop. And this notion that we can be loved, and not as not just as an abstraction. It's not enough to preach the gospel as an abstraction, which is a large part of what has happened in the West in the last 400 to 500 years. We preach it as if it's this thing, as opposed to it is an embodied experience with other people who are the body of Jesus. And we behold the glory of the one, and we behold it literally. I feel it in my chest because I see you seeing me, and you are the body of Jesus and the power of the Holy Spirit. This is live action. It's real and it is transformational, and it's true that we could have that encounter and then go away and hope that it sticks. And so it is something we have to continue to come back to practice over and over and over again. But it is the way that glory becomes the defining fulcrum around which this this text in Romans rotates. It's hinging on this. Because we move from there to now we start to understand suffering very, very differently.
Yeah.
Because we're entering into it from a different posture.
You talk in the book. You say you're talking about this form of pleasure that we're longing for, the form of joy that infants seek as they come into the world, looking for someone, looking for them. We're longing to be seen, soothed, safe, and secure. At our core, we desperately long to hear. And then we're so often surprised and even shocked when we do. And I love these statements. We are so glad to see you. We've been waiting for you. You are just who we've been looking for. And as I even say that, I feel that, right? I feel because I have experienced that from you guys. I've experienced that from, some people in my life, and there's nothing like it. There's nothing. And like you said before, when someone knows not just your, polished thing that you put out there, but, the gross stuff and all of it, and they still feel that way about you. There's nothing. There is nothing like that feeling, and I think that's what heaven's going to feel like, right?
Right. Oh,
when you
dude.
when you get there, that's what it's going to feel like.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's we could talk forever and a day about this, but it is also this is also the challenge, because it does require the degree to which I'm able to experience what you're talking about is commensurate with my willingness to be vulnerable with those parts that I'm most afraid of.
Yes. Yeah,
That's
because otherwise, someone says that to you and it doesn't have near the meaning that it does when someone who really knows you says those things to you.
Because you think, well, if you really knew me,
Right. That's right.
then you wouldn't be saying
You
those
wouldn't be
things.
so happy to see me.
Yeah.
Right.
Right,
So
yeah.
I don't believe you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think we see that as we practice this, we are getting ready for what's coming. Like like you were saying, Pep. Like we're practicing for heaven.
Yeah.
And the question is, will I be able to? It's like what Dallas Willard said once. I heard him say this publicly, just so great. He said, in his kind of Missouri drawl, God will let anyone into his heaven who can take it.
That's great.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This book, I can't wait for you all to get this book in your hands. There is so much in this. Could be my new favorite, Curt. It's feeling that way thus far. I just really love what you've written here, and I'm delighted to get the chance to talk to you about this in advance, and just want to thank you for writing it, because I can't wait to continue the read, and all you folks that are listening, I can't wait for you to get the book in your hands.
Yeah. Right on.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
It's been great.